Hi, this is Bill, and I have some exciting news for me today. So, as you know, at work I've been measuring the magnetic field from our instrument, which is called microwave limb sounder, and I've posted actually several videos about this scattered through my YouTube channel. And I've also been doing some support work for the EZIE project, even though I'm not funded by them. But there's a couple people in our group that are, and one of the things I've been doing, what they wanted to do was to compare their open source Forward model with the one we're doing using for MLS, and the Forward model is the thing that actually basically takes the magnetic field and computes the signals that the actual instrument receiver would see, the signals the satellite would measure. These are or how we actually measure the magnetic field. We actually kind of do this in reverse. We take the Forward model, put a field in there, see how closely it matches the observed radiances, and then you adjust the magnetic field until you get it to fit the signals. And I'll bring this up close. This is an easy calculation signals, but these are the kind of signals you see. Anyway, so we've been running into some problems and I've been stressing this enough. I said I don't know what your geometry is, because you need to know how the instrument's pointing, and in order to do these calculations well. So I've been given some information about that, and things weren't quite working, and I remember telling the people that. Well, I told them that I don't think the geometry is right, because when I ray traced through the atmosphere, it didn't seem to be. Well, I knew it wasn't the same as this ray trace that they had given me in the data, even though they've supplied me with the various angles I need for the pointing. And so, anyway, I guess a revelation came to me last night, and how to figure this out without using their data, or at least not their pointing data. So this is basically the idea here. Is that, okay, this represents the Earth. You've got your X, Y, Z axis. The EZIE satellite is here in position 1. Of course, it's actually moving. It's orbiting the Earth, so it'll be position 2, position 3 at a later time, but that's not relevant here. So anyway, so you can define a vector up to where the satellite is, and they give you the position of the satellite and the height and all that. The other piece of information they also did supply is this ray trace, but the last point on that ray trace is actually where it strikes the Earth. I call it the Earth strike point, which is here. It says I can calculate the radius of the Earth where, at the latitude and longitude they give me, so I can get this vector here. And so basically this vector, RSE plus S vector, should equal the Earth vector. So, it's just a simple math. R plus S equals R. From here you can solve for S pretty easily. And, then you can normalize S, which basically is this equation here, so we call that ND, and then this should equal this transformation calculation. You can calculate from the satellite position. I've worked out all this geometry. In fact, all the way back to 1987, I wrote programs to do this. So it's cool. It's interesting that people at work don't seem to, or at least I've worked with, don't seem to pay a lot of attention to this. But this has been a really foundational program for me, is to be able to understand all these rotations and orientations. So I've used this, and it's got me out of trouble a lot of times. So I know, you know ND from S. 001 is the definition, means that, you're pointing, it's in the direction of your pointing. So we can now solve for this F, which has 2 angles in it that I need to know, which is the elevation angle and the azimuth angle. And, and this is the math to compute these guys. So here's what happens. They supply me an elevation angle and an azimuth angle. My calculation gives 82 degrees for this elevation angle. Their calculation also gives 82 degrees for the elevation angle. So we agree on that. My calculation on the azimuth angle is like 1 degree, 1 degree, 0 for these 3 positions. Theirs is minus 134 for position 1, minus 155 for position 2, and minus 165 degrees for position 3. And this is obviously wrong because, you know, this instrument doesn't scan its field of view or anything like that. So really all these angles should stay the same. I mean, there's even some variation in my calculation. So it's not a perfect calculation. And that's probably because an additional factor in here is what they call roll, pitch, and yaw of the spacecraft. And this is changing as it's orbiting. But my calculations are a lot closer to not changing. And so anyway, I was explaining all this to my work colleague, and then, you know, I showed him, you know, I showed him this calculation here, and he was amazed because he overlaid that on the signals that the actual satellite is measuring, and they're matching up really well. In particular, the really hard to model components is linear coherence and the circular coherence. These two panels here, those are hard to model with the satellite measurements. And apparently the open source software is not getting the shapes of these right. It's doing the other two polarizations fairly well, similar to my model, but MLS was getting that right. So yes, as I was explaining all this, the instrument calibration guy walks into my colleague's office. We're all discussing this, and I'm showing him all this stuff and his radiuses, and of course he's the guy responsible for calibrating these radiuses. And he was, he was quite happy to see this because he's had his uncertainties about whether calibrating the instrument. They've got a lot of challenges there too, which I don't fully understand, other than at a very top level. I won't go into it here. But then he says, you really should be getting paid by EZIE to do this. And I said, that would be nice. And so he said, I'll give you a work authorization memo for that. And he said, you can go ahead and charge 0.2 FTE to or 20%. And so I said, awesome. I said, I said, I appreciate that, because we're scrambling for money, and there's going to be a big layoff coming up in October. I'm not really worried about that. If I get laid off, I retire. If I don't, then I continue working. I guess it's kind of what it comes down to. So, but anyway, at least this helps bring some money into JPL. So, anyway, this is kind of funny. I guess one of the people working on EZIE is also doing his own retrieval and showing some comparisons of their retrieval with basically with these ground states and ground stations, and he was showing some results, and of course they know that I'm grinding this out with MLS. That's my retention WAM that I am getting paid for. So he asked me, he says, well, have you done this for MLS? And I said, yeah. I said, I'll show you some results. So I walk out of the room into my office, and I come back with this big stack of papers, and he laughed. He said, I thought you were going to bring a computer in here. I said, oh no. I said, I'm 68. I do this the old-fashioned way, so I just start flipping plot after plot after plot after plot. It was kind of funny, but anyway, this is kind of cool. I don't know how much of this you can see because I'm just kind of winging it here, but here's a comparison between MLS and the EZIE retrieval. So you can see on the right here's the total field. So pretty good correlation. Over on the left here is the differences as a function of latitude. So you can see that we're agreeing most of the time within plus or minus 400 nanotesla. The instrument noise on each of these retrieved products is 250 nanotesla for the MLS and for the EZIE. And so a perfect agreement would basically be anything inside of plus or minus 350 nanotesla. And so most of the points are falling inside of there. So it's good. So I'm part of the EZIE team now. They're actually gonna pay me to do this. This is awesome. So just as a finishing up, I know the employment situation is sucky out there, and you know people are saying, yeah, you try to make yourself valuable at work so you don't get laid off or things like that. And then of course there's a lot of skepticism whether the work environment cares about this or not. And you know, and I can sympathize with that too. So, but I hope this could inspiring people to at least show that, yeah, if you can at least show or make yourself valuable, they do appreciate it. I guess I'm really actually been pretty humbled by this, because this is something that I've been grinding on for probably 2 years on and off. I had to do a lot of software modifications and things like that to make the MLS4 model work in EZIE configuration. Plus I had to make other modifications to it in order to make it work, do my own magnetic field retrieval, like the one I showed there. And I was initially told not to do this because, they just thought it would be too hard for the software modifications. And by the way, I resonate with this. There's a lot of stuff in there I don't understand, but there's bits of it I do. And in my limitations, I was able to, get the software to calculate these quantities called Jacobians that you need to do the inverse modeling. So I guess as I say, it's humbling. And as I said, actually I do thank my bosses, because even one guy said that, he said, I don't want to discourage you. I said, I'm sorry, he kind of said some of the things he said maybe a couple of years ago. I said, I want you to go ahead and do this. And now a lot of people are getting excited about this, because MLS right now can provide a 21-year record of the magnetic field perturbations. And there's actually only one other instrument called Orstat that actually has a longer record of this than what MLS has. And now Orstat measures it in situ up up high in the Earth, whereas the MLS is actually measuring this thing remotely to within probably an accuracy of about 0.5% or better, which is really phenomenally awesome, I think. And and it's measuring it in the atmosphere and closer to the ground, where it's probably more relevant and useful for various scientific studies, in terms of how the atmosphere couples with this, because the magnetic field couples with the solar protons coming in, and then this affects the energy transfer in the atmosphere and stuff like that. So anyway, if you like this video, please comment, subscribe, and it helps me with my low self-esteem, but my self-esteem is feeling a little better today. So anyway, thank you for watching, and I'll talk to you next time.